Good morning.
We mentioned that Ezekiel does a lot of things. Yeah, maybe you ought to wave to everybody first. That's always good.
Roger, good morning.
Lee is there.
So is she there?
Not sure.
Okay, yeah. A couple of people ill this week, and so that they contacted me. But Ezekiel is part of his prophetic methodology, is a street performer, right? And so God's always telling him, one crazy thing to do after the other. But this one caught my attention, I guess, because I was reading more larger sections. So I'm in chapter 4, and I just thought that this section was quirky enough that I'd read it again.
We like quirk.
Yeah, so I'm in Ezekiel 4, and here God's saying, remember to lie down for 390 days on the one side. It's a symbol that you are, a scapegoat, and then you can flip to the other side for a few days, and, kind of like a piece of meat on the grill.
I think it's 390 days or something, yeah.
And so he's lying on his side, and then on verse, let's start with verse 11. So he's lying on his side, right? Well, what's he going to eat as he's lying down? And remember, he's doing all these other theatrical productions, right? Like he had to draw
Barley cake.
Jerusalem on a Etch-a-Sketch, and then he had to build a little wall around it. Any way to sort of get the word across the judgment was coming, right? And that's that first section. We're in 1 to 33, the first section of Ezekiel. And today we're going to move beyond 33, and we'll explain a little bit why. But here it is. And could someone read 11 to the end of the chapter? Again, he's on his side, 390 days, you're to lie on your side. Weigh out 12 shekels of food to eat each day, and eat it at set times. And now he's going to go into some detail about the food. And someone can tell me, someone who's a baker here, whether this is a good recipe or not. I'm just not so sure. I know that
Barley
you're
beans and
absolutely.
Milk.
So Melissa, will you start with?
Also measure out 1/6 of a hin of water and drink it at set times. Eat the food you would, a loaf of barley bread. Bake it in the sight of the people, using human excrement for fuel. The Lord said, in this way the people of Israel will eat defiled food among the nations where I will drive them. Then I said, not so, sovereign Lord. I have never defiled myself. From my youth until now, I have never eaten anything found dead or torn by wild animals. No impure meat has ever entered my mouth. Very well, he said. I will let you bake your bread over cow dung instead of human excrement.
There you go, we can stop there.
Thank you. Very eloquent.
This is not good when we're having
Melissa
our
says,
snack.
the word of the Lord, thanks be to
Thanks be to
God.
God.
There's certain texts that does not work. It's so interesting though, because I guess we understand a little bit the dietary restrictions and how religious and how pious they were and how people stuck to the rules, right? That you remember Jesus later says, it's not what goes into the mouth, it just goes out the backside, and that does not defile, but what comes out of the tongue comes out of the heart. Human heart defiles. Well, this is the culture in which those words are being uttered. Those who really kept to the dietary rules as religious, because that stuff could defile you. And it was classic, like Ezekiel says, ever since my youth, I've never broken this, I've always kept the dietary laws, because those are from you. And what was the whole purpose of God saying, use human excrement and do it publicly? What do we just hear? Why did God want this to be done publicly? To cook your food over human excrement.
That's all you're gonna have for fuel.
You will eat defiled food
Yeah.
in a
In
foreign
other
land.
times, yeah.
So basically get used to it. This is going to be your future. Because, when you go somewhere else, you can't control, if you're in a refugee camp, right? If you're in, with exiles, you're not gonna be able to control your dietary.
Has anybody ever read this book? It's called None of These Diseases. It's an old book and it was written by several doctors. And they have done a lot of research and they have never, ever found anybody that kept a kosher diet that had stomach cancer. They,
Interesting.
and there were some other diseases also that, if they followed a kosher diet, they really never had X amount of diseases, but stomach cancer was the leading one.
He was talking to the Jews, the Hebrews, he was talking to them. Okay.
In
That was
exile.
before,
But remember, let's set this up again. So where is Ezekiel? Just remind us who he is again. He's this prophet, but he grew up, his profession was,
Priest.
he was a priest in the temple. So when he has all these visions about the temple, it's because that was his workplace. That was what had captured his imagination. How old is he?
30.
Is he married?
Yes,
She
yes,
died.
she died.
She dies, right? And we pointed out last week, he's not supposed to
Born.
mourn for his spouse. Kind of strange. I gave you my best guess on why that's the case, but it's just a guess. Commentators disagree, but I think it's because God says there are bigger things here at stake than your personal life. And sometimes that's the way life is. There are bigger things going on than just your personal grief. Ezekiel had a job of basically grieving for the whole nation in exile. That was his, so to speak, his mission. So we have this, it's going to come into play today, because when we start with chapter 34, that's often called the Gospel of Ezekiel. So here now comes the good news. We get the good news this week. We got all the judgment and the lying on your side for 390 days. We got all that last week, and fix your food over human activity, so people know that you're eating defiled food. That's what's that's what's coming. And of course, then God gives in, which is what I think is so interesting. Okay, you don't have to cook it over human excrement. Cow dung. You love cow dung,
It's
right?
still the same. It's-
No, cow dung smells a hell of a lot better. I know. The worst was chicken manure. Okay.
It was, as we all know, in many cultures, especially Western cultures, that you could cook over cow dung. That's done. That's done.
Mhm.
Especially if you're out on the range with the deer and the antelope play, that's what you do. So, but let's review a little bit the Assyrian, the history a little bit. And we review that not just for Ezekiel, but we're going to come back to this every week when we're talking about the prophets. So there are certain dates you don't have to hold on to all the dates, but there are just a few, right, that are important. And here we have, remember, the Assyrians come in and destroy the northern kingdom, 722. And the Assyrians basically wipe out those 10 tribes. They're gone. And they're dispersed throughout the Middle East. No one knows what happened to them. Obviously, some are in Assyria. Maybe some of those family end up in Babylon later on. They end up all over the place, though. And then other peoples are brought into the northern kingdoms, and they become the Samaritans, half cousins, half breeds, religiously all over the place, right? Which is part of the New Testament tradition. But think about that. That's 700 years by the time we get to Jesus, the destruction of that whole area, and it's a huge area. 700 years of sort of this divergent, somewhat Jewish, somewhat not Jewish tradition, next to the 2 tribes that maintain in the south, right? The southern kingdom. Now, what are some of the names from the northern kingdom? So when you're reading the Bible, sometimes they call it the northern kingdom, 10 tribes. Sometimes it's called Ephraim. So referring to Joseph's lineage coming out of Egypt.
Manasseh.
half tribe Manasseh. So
Benjamin.
when you talk about Benjamin, that's the northern kingdom, with different references, different phrases, all used for the northern kingdom, not used for the southern kingdom, which is,
That's where they get the 124,000, right?
because that's the dominant tribe in the south, and that's what we'll be talking about with Ezekiel.
Rick,
So,
Rick, just as a clarification, what's the difference between Judah and Judea?
same,
Same thing.
Oh, it is.
I think it's the same thing.
Okay.
And that's where we get Jews.
Mhm.
Who lives in Judah? Jews.
I gotta take this.
So, but there were two tribes actually, right, in the south, that just the Judah becomes the name. I think it's the dominant tribe, as far as I know. You've got Assyrian dominance. If they're starting to lose their dominance in 612, they lose it in 612 to Babylon. So you have this change of empires, just like we do today, right? There's an event like World War I or World War II or whatever it might be, and empires rise and fall based on what happens on those major events, economically, militarily. And so Assyria loses, Babylon takes over, and we have this very famous king whose name no one can spell, let alone pronounce in church if you've got to read it, which is Nebuchadnezzar. Although that's the one we learned in Sunday school. So some of us, can nail it because, well, that was part of our Sunday school training. They come in, and the South, Judah, has been not happy by paying tribute to Assyria. So now this is their chance, they think, to form alliances that will protect them from this new upstart power, Babylon. So who do you turn to if you're in Judah to protect you, or to enter into an alliance so that together you can hold off being able to pay tribute? And that was, as we mentioned last week, Egypt. If they can partner with Egypt, that will provide them enough security so they don't have to pay tribute, give them some independence, and that's what they want. Now, this was a long-standing desire in the South. In fact, sometimes they didn't even fight with the North. Right, when Assyria came down, Judah said, we're not going to get into that. That's, they had sort of a, we're not in this together mentality, right? We can all go through that as a nation, and that's what they went through. And they said, well, you guys fight it out, and Syrians then dominate them. And now they've got a chance, okay, not to pay tribute, to keep independent, to side with Egyptians, and the prophets rail against this. Prophets say, wait, you're putting your trust not in the Lord, but in Egypt?
Yeah, look at the
It's like,
past, dude.
What are you thinking? Of course they're going to abandon you in the tough times, right?
Have you forgotten Pharaoh?
But even remember, when the North is destroyed, who else came? And they were thinking about partnering with them over against the Assyrians. You remember this? This was the Babylonians. And they bring, the king brings the diplomats and the king to Jerusalem, and he shows all his wealth, right, of the temple, and they're going, what are you doing? What are you doing? You don't show someone your checking account. They're going to turn on you. Now, that was 100 years later, but that's what the prophets are constantly railing against. Don't trust Babylon. Don't trust Egypt.
Rick, do the prophets ever say, and by the way, this is going to go on for 3,000 more years.
No.
So in the year 2023, you will see the same thing over and over again.
You might say the book of Revelation, maybe the seer, John the seer, maybe you could say, yeah, because the stuff is continuing, right? It's continuing. So in any case, that's within all this international intrigue, basically. If you're watching cable TV at that time, they're all talking about the international intrigue. Egypt, Babylon, Assyria's down, Babylon's up, Egypt's trying to hang in there. Everybody's kind of jockeying for their place in the world. Later on, then who will emerge? The Greeks, and then the Romans, right? So at 605, finally, this Babylonian enters their dominance. They come to Jerusalem and say, pay up, and we'll keep you safe, no war, right? And Judah says, forget you, probably used a hand gesture, and therefore now Nebuchadnezzar has to come and win the tribute, right? Normally you just pay it and then everything was fine. Of course, other than it's basically a massive tax to keep you safe. But here, then he comes in and lays siege, and it's a pretty bad scene. Now, one of the things that I always misunderstood in reading this, that when Babylon comes in, it's not one battle, and then they haul everybody off in exile. He does this for 10, 15 years, comes in, slowly takes over this group, slowly takes over another group. And there are waves of exiles going to Babylon. And we know here, Ezekiel's in one of the first waves. So he's already there. But when he starts prophesying, the temple's still up and functioning. So we won't hear about the destruction of Jerusalem until chapter 33. We want to read that just a little bit, just to get a taste for that chapter, because it's kind of interesting. In the tapes, they go up to 33 on section 1. This prophecy, when he hears the news, not a prophecy. Ezekiel's already said, the temple will be destroyed. That's his prophetic word. In chapter 33, it comes true. All of a sudden, what he had been prophesying comes true. And he gets the bad news. And we want to read about the bad news he receives. Remember, he's an artist, he's a poet, he's a street performer, right? And just like we would use multimedia now to get people's attention, right? This is what you did back in the day. Everyone's walking along the streets, everyone's going, even when you're in a refugee camp. And therefore, God says, do these things, and people will notice. You get across the message. So it's
Oh,
great.
well, why is he not, I'm just asking a realistic question here. If you decided to do the same thing if we had church steps,
I thought about it.
how long do you think you would last before somebody said, I think we gotta get rid of this guy?
Yeah,
I mean, talk
about a
about
half
just
a day,
realistically.
probably. Yeah.
I could understand you having a protest for 24 hours, but usually what you do, if you're a good protester, you get a group around you and it becomes a group thing. And to do this as an individual is not what you'd consider a highly influential way of changing people's minds. Because you put more doubt in their mind than you put credibility by doing
And
something
yet,
like this.
Especially if you're by yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you've got a group, at least, oh, well, maybe they've got a point.
yeah.
Yeah, there's 5,000 standing on the street corner of Tamiami and Pine Ridge, and you go, okay. if it's
And we'll
5,000
alternate,
people.
it's
But
my
usually-
on their side.
But usually on the corner of Tamiami and Pine Ridge, there are not thousands, there are 10 waving signs. And even then, even with 10, you're going, nice sign, big flag, but
But you do notice?
Did you notice?
Yeah.
I think that's the point here.
Yeah.
We're still reading about him lying on the side for 390 days. So it struck somebody's fancy.
I bet he had bed sores when he finished.
But remember, God tells him, this is the major prophets. I mean, Isaiah's that way too, but Ezekiel in particular, God says, oh, by the way, no one's gonna pay attention to you. That's, yeah. So it's not only, oh, I want you to do this. Oh, by the way, no one's gonna care. I think, and this is arguable, sometimes you make a point for posterity, for history. And someone now is not gonna listen. We do this with our kids, don't we? Or we do it with our grandkids. Sometimes we leave a note, or we leave a message some way, or we give an inheritance. And we know they're not gonna understand it now, but they might 20 years ago, 20 years from now. And so here, the protest, I think, has this historical, dimension to it. Like we're still saying, what does that mean? So it's kind of interesting. Let's go to 33 though. So here we've got he's an artist, a poet, street performer, interesting tactic. I don't think it's meant to create a movement, right? It's rather to say it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. More exiles are going to come. Jerusalem, the temple, it's all gonna be destroyed. It's all kind of bad news. But I want to have said those things up front. I want to have written those down for later, right? Because that'll be important. Here we've got Jerusalem's fall explained, and let's, again, every time I ask for someone to read this, then Melissa's the one who reads it. So thank you for that, Melissa. We appreciate that gift to the body. Jerusalem's fall. Here is, so we've got dreams of trauma. We talked about that, right? This is all traumatic. And often, I mean, Ezekiel's visions and his actions as a street performer are also fantastical, right? It's like fantasy in many ways. Even the street performances are a bit crazy, but a little over the top. Sort of, what do we call it? Jumping the shark, or what is this? I think it's jumping.
Jumping the shark.
I think it's jumping the shark.
Think something.
It's a movie reference. Someone's got to Google that.
I never heard that.
I will look it up. I think it's when,
You're the movie buff.
it's when you're watching a movie and you go, oh, that's too much. That's too crazy. I don't buy that. It's a jumping the
Yeah, are
shark.
you saying
Sure,
shark
it is
or
a
shark?
shot,
Shark. I
Shark.
think it comes from,
Yeah, here's a lot, but.
I think that's what. Let's not get diverted, but I'm gonna find out. It's on the shark. It's
Yeah.
going over the top, going over the
That's
top.
what that means, but,
What's that?
yeah,
Jump at the
I'm just saying you're right, not that you would ever be wrong, but you know.
Thank you for that, Margaret. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, it is in Wikipedia. It does exist.
Yeah.
And what does it mean? Just because
Which is
now
what you
I'm,
said.
Over the top. Over the top.
Yeah, of a television series or movie, reach a point at which far-fetched events are included merely for the sake of novelty, indicative of a decline in quality.
there you go.
The reality shows,
Yeah.
Kardashians.
That's Ezekiel. Ezekiel is jumping the shark. Okay?
Loses its luster, yeah.
I think Ezekiel's jumping the shark.
And just to add 2 cents, the derivation is from the old sitcom Happy Days.
Oh.
When Henry Winkler literally
Jump
jumped the
the
shark.
Oh,
And you learned it at Thursday
Here,
Bible
right
study.
here.
Yeah,
It came from, tell all your friends.
It came from the '70s show Happy Days.
Yeah,
That's
that's
Oh,
what-
okay, yeah, Howard got it, yeah, he's right, yeah.
Sorry, dude.
You beat me to it, you're
So
faster.
Rick, no, we don't have the Bible according to
That's
Fawn's.
our takeaway.
It's-
Sure. Probably not what he intended.
So certain shows are known for that. They jump the shark, right? And you go, and sometimes it's entertaining, right? It's entertaining. Other times you go, gee, that's just, that was unnecessary, right? When you jump a shark, it's like, oh, come on now, you've gone too far, right? And so that's the whole idea. But I think that's Ezekiel. He's jumping the shark. It's way over the top. Now, he's doing this in response to God. God tells him to jump the shark, right? Do these crazy things. But I wanted to tie it in with dreams after trauma. A part of this is things happen like this after trauma. And we talked about dreams, you lose a loved one, all of a sudden, the dreams become more fantastical in their nature. And I think that's what's going on with Ezekiel. But here now, an exile comes, we're already in chapter 33. And now comes the bad news, but it's the bad news confirming what he had prophesied. Let's start with 21. We're in chapter 33, and this is, I've always heard that 33 to 37 is often referred, these famous chapters, as the Gospel of Ezekiel. Although we're going to cut them a little, we're going to cut 33 today, because we did that last week. And for some reason, they cut off and go to 34. But in doing that, this is chapter 33, which is the pivotal moment when Ezekiel hears the bad news.
But don't they review that in the video we're gonna see today?
In the 12th year of our exile, in the 10th month on the 5th day, a man who had escaped from Jerusalem came to me and said, "The city has fallen." Now the evening before the man arrived, the hand of the Lord was on me, and he opened my mouth before the man came to me in the morning. So my mouth was open, and I was no longer silent. Then the word of the Lord came to me, "Son of man, the people living in those ruins in the land of Israel are saying, Abraham was only one man, yet he possessed the land. But we are many. Surely the land has been given to us as our possession. Therefore say to them, this is what the sovereign law says. Since you eat meat with blood still in it, and look to your idols and shed blood, should you possess the land? You rely on your sword. You do detestable things, and each of you defiles his neighbor's wife. Should you then possess the land? Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. As surely as I live, those who are left in the rooms will fall by the sword. Those out in the country I will give to the wild animals to be devoured, and those in strongholds and caves will die of a plague. I will make the land a desolate waste, and her proud strength will come to an end, and the mountains of Israel will become desolate, so that no one will cross them. Then they will know that I am the Lord, when I have made the land a desolate waste because of all the detestable things they have done. As for you, son of man, your people are talking together about you by the walls and at the doors of the houses, saying to each other, come and hear the message that has come from the Lord. My people come to you as they usually do and sit before you to hear your words, but they do not put them into practice. Their mouths speak of love, but their hearts are greedy for unjust gain. Indeed, to them, you are nothing more than one who sings love songs with a beautiful voice and plays an instrument well, for they hear your words, but do not put them into practice. When all this comes true, and it surely will, then they will know that a prophet has been among them. Ooh. Detestable.
It's a testimony, right? You don't buy it now, but when these things come true, and now they're coming true, right? Then you will know that their prophet was in the land. So what struck you in this section? Again, this is the pivot between just judgment, but once he said that, now it's going to turn to a whole nother metaphor about good news, right? About what's going to happen that's going to be positive. But I want to do that first, then we're going to read just a little bit of 34, then we'll go to the film. Anything about his language, anything about the content that really strikes you?
Rick, for me, what I was hearing is the preaching of you're all hypocrites. This is a very Christian kind of a message. You know, who among you are not hypocrites? And who are, you say you love thy neighbor. This goes right back to the love thy neighbor, befriend thy neighbor theme. And says, but you defile your neighbor, you defile your neighbor's wife. Man, they must have been doing an awful lot of adultery in there, in that place. If all these wives are being defiled in the way it was stated.
After they ate all their steaks rare.
Absolutely. And then he talks about the greed, and you're a greedy people. You're supposed to be loving people. And if you put it in the context of our conversation this morning, you're supposed to be a community. You're supposed to be a community of people working together for the greater good. Instead, you're all working for your individual selves. So to me, there's a whole lot of message inside this. It's very, very powerful.
And it's right now, 2023, you see incidences of this.
So there's just this blanket of moral, and remember what people are saying. He's a priest, so he's I think he's talking as an insider here. He knows the community well. He says, you say, well, the land belongs to us because we're Abraham's descendants. And Ezekiel's going, big whoop.
You don't deserve it.
You don't, exactly.
To keep the land, you have to be people of God, keeping the covenant, right? And then he kind of goes into that laundry list of hypocrisies of you're not living according to and he goes into some detail here. So we get a sense of what had gone wrong.
Yeah, it sounds like it was pretty bad, actually. Now, he may be exaggerating, but if he was telling even a good portion of the truth, these folks are in deep trouble. They're not living
Ezekiel
right.
would never exaggerate. But it's interesting. What do you not hear here? Which I think is interesting. He's not blaming it on the leadership. Because often we'd say, oh, and you read the prophets, it's the king, Here, it's not the king,
Individual people.
the people.
Yeah.
He's going after the people there, which is, and of course, he's saying, you exiles, you guys were all part of this, right? Don't tell me any different. I know, right? You were doing this, you were doing that, and so you can imagine he's not beloved in the community.
No.
Because this is sort of an in-your-face.
It's a guilt trip. Essentially, what he's doing is he's throwing a guilt trip on all the people. And boy, if you throw a guilt trip on a whole community,
Yeah.
you better be aware that you've got a great plan to deal with the outcome of that guilt trip. Because if you don't have a plan, what happens, all you have is a bunch of enemies. And that's the
Ezekiel here,
danger.
up to 33, has got a bunch of enemies.
Right, and I love the way it ends, you know, when this comes and come, it will,
It will.
then they will know that a prophet has been among them.
Yeah, in other
They will
words,
recognize me.
But only then,
True.
but only then that I had always been telling you the truth. Now, you get that a little bit in Naples. Now, I'm gonna step on, you know, we got this, my own internal struggles this week. So we're getting the storm, right?
yeah.
Okay, and it happened to be on the same days that this happened, like Ian, right? On Sunday, you get the same, it's gonna go to Tampa. I'm like, oh no, it's a repeat, right? Because last time on Monday, I stopped watching the news because it was all gonna go to Tampa.
Right.
So I didn't watch anymore until it was too late. Then, then I'm watching everything from the windows, right? Watching ships go
After the
by.
power goes out.
Power goes out. And the security, the security alarm goes off for 48 hours. That was a tip, something was wrong. So then we hear that again. And you can become cynical, say, okay, now, do I believe the forecasters this time? It's gonna go up to what is it, the Big Bend or?
Yeah, big.
And so this time I watch, because you're a little nervous, right? Let's watch the forecast all the way through.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, 2 more feet, and the water would have been in the parking garage. 1 foot, I think it had entered actually the parking garage, 2 feet, the cars would have been destroyed again. I mean, that's how close.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was.
So Rick, the print-
Hey, your place, I saw how close it got, at 1 foot more,
Yeah.
and your place would have gone down again, right?
Mine too. Where I live now, I'm in a flood zone. Water was 1 street over.
1 street over?
Yeah, you start to come across the
And I
road.
still don't know how you survived last time. I mean, that was.
I had to talk to the big guy.
Because
It literally stopped this right before my boxes like that.
Yeah, because you were right there.
Yeah,
On
yeah.
Vanderbilt, so.
Well, Rick, there's a principle behind this, and we've all learned, at least I learned it. I was a naval officer, we went through terrible, terrible storms out at sea. And, some of them were really frightening. One of them, I almost died in that storm. It was so bad. It almost took the entire ship. But our principle always was, and I'm sure this goes back to these ancient times, you plan for the worst and hope for the best. But so, on Sunday afternoon, all the way through Tuesday morning, I'm working down on the docks and we're, fixing things, getting rid of furniture that could, blow away. So there's a whole time of preparation because we're planning for the worst.
So here's the thing, though, I guess this is my point. Someone comes as a prophet of doom and says, oh boy, we're gonna get hit. And it's easy as a Floridian, but every area of country has something like this, right? An analog. Where you'd say, oh no, I'm fine. I've lived through these before, I know how to do this, no problem. And then sometimes you don't plan, right? You just say, I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just not gonna do anything, And my guess is this is what's going on with Ezekiel. That's my point. Is a lot of people are listening to him and saying,
There are a lot of
I
analogies
can't,
today.
I'm just not gonna, I can't hear him again. I've been hearing him every day at the marketplace for 390 days.
So let's give a common example. How many of you have been hearing about the problems of climate change for at least 50 years?
Yeah,
And
forever.
I know I heard them back in the late 60s, early 70s. And now it's upon us. And what did we do in the interim? A few people did a few things, but not enough to prevent climate change. So that same phenomenon is going on today. The prophets all told us, they were the signs.
And I think that's at least here where Ezekiel says, and when all this comes true, and it will, it's sort of, it will, then you will know that I'm a prophet. And so now we're gonna pay attention to him, because now he's gonna come with some good news. And Melissa, we're gonna do this and we'll show the, let's just start. Oh, by the way, what's the language he uses for Ezekiel? When the sovereign God, always talks about the sovereign God, which is interesting, right? The sovereign God speaks to the Son of Man.
Yes.
So this phrase is highly debated about, okay, it means Ezekiel, does it mean Israel? Who does it, of course, and we're all thinking, because we're New Testament Christians, here's Jesus, because Jesus will say, always, and in Matthew, we hear this like every week, who do people say the Son of Man is? Right? And of course, some would say, if they've gone to Bible study, oh, that's Ezekiel. And Jesus might have been smiled and said, okay. And so remember last week? Well, the disciples responded and said, well, some say John the Baptist. Some say Elijah. Some say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets.
You were gonna look up the Jeremiah thing.
I think it's the more Jeremiah or the other prophets, which would include Ezekiel. Because Ezekiel speaks to that, as does Jeremiah. The Son of Man language is, well, if he says Son of Man, that's what he's referring to, is the major prophets, So it's quite distinctive. So when we hear Son of Man in Matthew, for example, because that's what we're reading, we have to think major prophets, Ezekiel. So when we go back and kind of do some archaeological work and say, okay, what was he referring to here? So is Jesus seen as a prophet of judgment? The answer has to be yes. There. But also the gospel of hope. So we want to just read this because Jesus is obviously also reading these sections from 34 to 37. And a lot of the good news of the kingdom is going to come right from these chapters. And notice the language here and how it shifts. And that's what we'll be watching this Ezekiel part 2 today. Go ahead, Melissa, with just a little bit in 34.
Okay. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves.
Okay, I'm gonna stop there. Notice the shift of language here. It's not just like you all are sinners and you're sleeping with,
Now believe
your neighbor's wives and you're eating the wrong dietary foods. Now, who are we going after?
leaders.
The leaders. Really a big deal. We're gonna go after the shepherds of Israel. Okay, keep going.
Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured.
Okay, think here. You scribes and Pharisees, right?
Yeah.
That's Jesus translate this shepherd language into scribes and Pharisees doing the same thing. This is where Jesus is getting sort of the critique or at least some of the language where he sees his own mission. Keep going.
You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals.
Does that remind you of any parables? That Jesus would abandon the 99?
Yes.
So when you hear that parable, you're thinking, oh, it's Ezekiel. That's Ezekiel. That's where he's getting sort of the images of also his sense of mission. Yeah, I have to leave the 99 for the one in doing the parables. And the sheep gate, remember that? Because there are wolves, there are leaders out there who are only wanting to exploit you. And so the sheep gate is to protect and keep you scribes and basically to protect you from religious leadership. That's all again coming from these chapters. Keep going.
My sheep wandered all over the mountains and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched for them or looked for them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered, and has become food for all the wild animals, and because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than for my flock. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds, and I will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be food for them.
Okay, before we continue, you get the language here is quite interesting. I could imagine when Ezekiel's preaching against, the people's hypocrisy and their sin and, and I'm sure the other priests who had also were his colleagues might have said, yeah, I think he's right. It's a little crazy, but I think he's right.
But now.
He jumped the shark, but he's right. But now he turns the critique on them. And now he's lost them too.
Yeah.
He's looking, 'cause
Beat everybody.
he's going after everybody here, okay?
Rick, too, there's this, I actually opened up to John 10 as you were reading this, Melissa.
Yeah.
And when you read John 10 and Christ talks about the shepherd and the flock, I mean, it's almost, I'm reading this in John 10 and you're reading that in Ezekiel, and I'm going, it looks like there's a pretty strong parallel here,
Oh, yes,
a parallel, I meant to say.
yeah.
And in the parallel, though, what's fascinating is in John 10, John 10 opens up the whole idea of abundance. And that by tending to the flock, the leaders tending to the flock, you then create abundance. And that connection then goes on through John 13:34, which means, okay, how are you going to create the abundance? Through love thy neighbor. And then John 14:15 and 16 goes into how do we create the friendships that are going to actually do these things. So it's a fascinating set of parallels.
And we need to pick these, because this, we're meant to read these together. This is, one has heavily influenced the other. And obviously Jesus in reading Ezekiel completely has embraced this message. Yeah, keep going, so we get more of these parallels.
Well, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flocks when he is with them, so will I look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on a day of clouds and darkness. I will bring them out from the nations and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them into their own land. And I will pasture them on the mountains of Israel, in the ravines, and in all the settlements in the land. I will tend them in good pasture, and the mountain heights of Israel will be their grazing land. There they will lie down in good grazing land, and there they will feed in rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I myself will tend to my sheep and have them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost, and I will bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak, but the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice.
Now there's a shift.
Whoa.
God's gonna do it. I'm gonna do this. Right? I'm gonna provide the leadership for my people, because I'm just so fed up with the leadership that I sent back to shepherds. Keep going again, so we'll finish this chapter and then we'll go.
As for you, my flock, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will judge between one sheep and another, and between rams and goats. Is it not enough for you to feed on the good pasture? Must you also trample the rest of your pasture with your feet? Is it not enough for you to drink clear water? Must you also muddy the rest with your feet? Must my flock feed on what you have trampled and drink what you have muddied with your feet? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says to them. See, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep, because you shrove with flank and shoulder, butting all the weak sheep with your horns until you have driven them away. I will save my flock, and they will no longer be plundered. I will judge between one sheep and another. I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David.
Whoa.
There it
Whoa,
is.
here we go.
Whoa.
Here we go.
And he will tend them. He will tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God. My servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. I will make a covenant of peace with them and rid the land of savage beasts. so that they may live in the wilderness and sleep in the forest in safety. I will make them and the places surrounding my hill a blessing. I will send down showers in season. There will be showers of blessing. The trees will yield their fruit and ground will yield their crops. The people will be secure in their land. They will know that I am the Lord. And when I break the bars of their yoke, hang on, and rescue them from the hands of those who enslave them, they will no longer be plundered by the nations, nor will wild animals devour them. They will live in safety and no one will make them afraid. I will provide for them a land renowned for its crops. They will no longer be victims of famine in the land or bear the scorn of the nations. Then they will know that I, the Lord their God, am with them, and that they, the Israelites, are my people, declares the sovereign Lord. You are my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, and I am your God, declares the sovereign Lord. The word of the Lord.
Yeah. God, this is so much better than the
Yeah.
other text from chapter 4 where we're eating barley bread over cow dung, right?
Psalm 20.
Can you see why it's called the Gospel of Ezekiel?
Mm.
And you notice salvation comes on multiple levels.
Judgment's there.
I mean, it's politically, the nations will respect us again. I'm going to bless the land. The land is now not going to be cursed, and you'll be able to feed and thrive off of it. A community will reestablished, right? I mean, it's just this beautiful vision of what God is going to do, and he's going to send a new shepherd. He's first of all says, "I'm the shepherd." He says, "Oh, but it's going to be from the house of David."
So do you think that we have all these homeless people living on the streets and, pooping on the sidewalks and all? Do you think we shouldn't worry about that now because the Lord will take care of it?
Be Portland.
And
Los Angeles.
Portland,
New York.
Yeah, New York.
Portland, San Francisco.
Oakland.
But it happens down on Fifth too. If you talk to some of the retail owners there, they'll talk about some of the difficulties, even in a prestigious street like Fifth Avenue, there's homelessness and there's that all over. Now, the prophet here, Ezekiel, remember in the first section, he turns to us basically, or the Israelites, and says, "You did that." I'm kind of translating here. Isn't there enough food in Naples to feed these people? Yes. You've abandoned your own people, basically, and that's sort of Ezekiel saying, "You hypocrites, you're supposed to be a community, offering yourselves to God, serving the neighbor, and look, your neighbors are out of food, they're out of work. You can't take care of them." It's sort of that.
Well,
That's
we're trying
1 to 33. Though.
We have St. Matthew's House, we have Habitat for Humanity, we have the Harry Chapin Food. I see the Publix right down here. I see Harry Chapin Food, taking Publix stuff that's ready to expire and make sure we feed the people.
I think that's one of the most important things for me about one of the most important ministries we do here at Emmanuel is that feeding program at the park. Just is. And we tried it here, if you remember, it didn't quite work. Because people didn't come here, but they are coming out of the park. And you're talking about 520 families. So how many people is that? It's a lot. And it's grown. That is, I thought, after COVID, this will decrease. It's increased.
It's the biggest in Collier County. Food site.
So now, what other things should we be doing? I mean, so I think when, I've been talking about G-Flow. By the way, the Sunday forum this week is on G-Flow. Instead of got milk, it's got G-Flow, which is gospel for the life of the world. And I think that's one response is that this congregation said we are going to commit
One church,
to
multiple
a
communities.
gospel for the life of our neighbors wherever we can. And that might be the feeding program, that might be Grace Place, where we have mentors, people who are helping these young Latino kids. It might be at St. Matthew's House where you have people that are homeless.
Might be here.
Might be here.
We seem to go everywhere else, but.
So and that's always the question. How do we when we see need, wherever that is, how do we as a community respond to that? It should be like this visceral spiritual response when we see need. Now, we can't do everything, but the question is, what has God called us to do? If we're leaning into the neighborhood, what emerges? And the congregation has actually been very responsive to that, and we continue to be responsive.
There's this hidden compassion too that comes out in storms.
Yep.
So here we have Idalia just going through, and of course, we don't want anyone to be hurt, but there's always these stories of people who just spontaneously are moved to either drive their food truck across the state and to give, to roll up their sleeves. And that, I don't know, that I think for all of us is this glimmer of kind of like, oh man, there's people at their best, right? So we're always in motion, right? But that's some pictures of people at their best. Of course, when we see stores just being broken into and people walking out and taking what they want with masks on, and the people who have guns or security, they're standing there and they don't do anything. It's kind of this, wow, you get this, wow, that's us at our worst, right? So we live with these two things.
Yeah. When I was in Russia and did several courses, I always had the last day. I would tell my students that they could come and we talk about anything that we had talked about, or if they wanted to ask me questions on American life, I would try my very best to answer. And the one time this girl said, I hear Americans really love each other. Well, that took me back, and I thought, it's just what Jim was saying. When push, and I said, well, I'll teach you a new idiomatic expression. When push comes to shove, we stick together. And it happened to be, I was there not too long after Andrew. So I gave the example of Andrew. At my mother's church, there was a contractor. He took his whole crew down to Homestead and he dedicated a week. That's what he went down. He stayed 6 weeks because he was appalled at the way things were built. He said they skimped on nails, and so forth. And then I used the example of Pennsylvania Dutch for my area. Barn burns down, everybody gets together, and the more I thought about it, the Russians had no sense of volunteerism because they had no spiritual background. Where did we learn to give? Probably in church, but they never had that. So they were just blown away when I would tell them, what people gave and did in crises, especially.
So when we hear the text, think about these stories now, because that's not happening in Israel. It didn't happen back in Israel, and it's not happening in exile either, probably. So it's not the push comes to shove story in exile.
Right.
It's rather that people are falling apart. And then Ezekiel moves from the critique of the people, right, to the critique of leaders. And then he presents an answer. God's going to, okay, God's going to do this through David. But let's roll that now. And again, they start here on 34, but they could have started with 33 is that pivotal chapter where we move from just judgment to.
Rick, before we do, just one other observation. As Melissa was reading, one of the things that was very clear in the second half of what you read was the bringing of abundance. It's a whole story of abundance. And as I go back to John 10 also talks about, after he talks about the shepherd, then the abundance that flows out of it. So this abundance theme, I think, is really important that's sitting inside this. And how to be a shepherd, and that's the leadership.
To lead the sheep to pastures that are productive, right? support. He goes into great detail, Ezekiel, and what abundance really means. That's a good point. All right?
Yep, we're good.
The book of the prophet Ezekiel. In the first video, we were introduced to Ezekiel the priest, and he's sitting among the exiles in Babylon. And he's confronted by the awesome glory of God's temple presence, but it's appearing to him in Babylon. And then Ezekiel discovers why. It's because of Israel's idolatry and injustice that has compelled God to abandon his own temple. And while there is still hope for the future, the book went on to develop Ezekiel's message of divine judgment, first for Israel and then for the nations around Israel. And then a key moment happened in chapter 33. Ezekiel receives a report that the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem is over because the city has fallen. The temple is destroyed. Ezekiel's grim words of warning came true. The exile was the most horrendous catastrophe that ever happened to Israel, and it raised the big questions of whether God was done with Israel for good. But remember, at the end of chapter 11, God promised that there was still a future beyond exile for Israel. And so the rest of the book is designed to explore Ezekiel's vision of hope, first for Israel, then for the nations, and then for all of creation. The hope for Israel begins with God promising to raise up a new David, a future messianic king, who's going to be the kind of leader that Israel needed but never got. And this new Israel, who's going to come under the messianic king's rule, is going to be a transformed people. God's going to deal with the heart of their problem of rebellion by giving them new hearts. It's just like Moses promised at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. God says he's going to remove their hard hearts and send his spirit into his people to give them new, soft hearts that can love and obey their God. And this idea gets developed in the next strange vision. Ezekiel sees a huge valley filled up with dry human bones and skeletons, and God tells him that it's an image, a metaphor for Israel's spiritual state. So their rebellion against God, it resulted in exile and the literal death of many people, but it was also a metaphorical death of their covenant relationship. And God tells Ezekiel that his spirit is coming to bring his people back to life. And so this wind comes, and it causes all of the bones to stand up, and it fills them with breath and life, and then skin grows over the bones, and then all of a sudden Ezekiel sees all of these new humans standing in front of him. Now this vision, it's recalling the story about the creation of humans in Genesis chapter 2, where God made humans out of dirt and divine breath. And so Israel and all humanity have rebelled, resulting in death. And so the only hope is that God would perform a new act of creation and remake humans in such a way that they can truly live in a relationship of love with God and with each other. And so after God is going to deal with the evil that's in the hearts of his own people, some questions still remain unresolved. Like, what about the evil that's still rampant out there among the nations? And what about the future of God's dwelling place in the temple? And this is what the final two sections of the book are about. So first come chapters 38 and 39, and they promise God's final defeat of evil among the nations, which gets personified by a ruler who's named Gog from the land of Magog. Now this name is derived from a genealogy of ancient kingdoms and lands from Genesis chapter 10, and it referred to powerful nations from the distant past. And so Ezekiel picks up this ancient biblical name as an image of any and all violent kingdoms. And so we find that Gog gets allied with 7 nations that come from all 4 directions of the compass, is clearly an image that represents all of the nations. And this also helps us understand why Ezekiel describes Gog with images that he used earlier in the book to describe the king of Tyre and the king of Egypt, Pharaoh. For Ezekiel, Gog is an amalgam of all of the worst, most violent people in the Bible. Gog is the archetype of human rebellion against God. The basic story in these chapters is that Gog resists God's plan to restore his people. And so just like Pharaoh in the Exodus story, Gog comes to destroy the people. But God unleashes his justice on Gog, and it's in a flurry of scenes that don't actually make very good literal sense if you read them in sequence. Because first, Gog and his armies are consumed by an earthquake, but then they're consumed by fire 2 different times. And then after that, God comes and strikes Gog and his army down in the fields where they lay unburied for months. It's clear that these scenes are full of symbol and imagery. Ezekiel has pulled out his entire poetic tool set here to describe how God is determined to finally defeat human evil that has ruined his world. And it's so that he can pave the way for a new creation. And so once evil is finally dealt with among the nations, the last section of the book describes how God's presence is going to one day return to his people and his temple to bring cosmic restoration. So Ezekiel first gets this long, elaborate vision of a new temple and a new city. He's given this heavenly tour guide who shows him around the new temple complex, and it's much larger and more majestic than even Solomon's temple. There's a new altar, new priests, a whole new system of worship. And then after this elaborate tour, God's glorious throne chariot that he saw back in his first vision comes back, and it enters the new temple. Now, the meaning of these temple visions has been the source of debate for a long, long time. So some Christian and Jewish readers believe that this vision will be fulfilled literally one day, and that these chapters offer the actual blueprints of the new temple that will be built when the Messiah returns and brings God's kingdom. But many other Jewish and Christian readers think that this vision, like all of Ezekiel's other visions, is full of symbols, and they depict the reality of God's presence returning to his people in the Messianic kingdom, but not necessarily in the form of an actual building. Whichever view you take, it's important that Ezekiel never calls the city Jerusalem, and chapters 47 and 48 show why. Ezekiel sees this tiny stream pouring out of the temple threshold and steps, and then it quickly becomes this raging river, and then it flows out of the temple and the city into the desert, into one of the most desolate places on planet Earth, the Dead Sea Valley. And then that river, it leaves behind it a trail of trees and life, and then the Dead Sea gets transformed into a living sea that's teeming with plants and animals. All of this imagery comes from the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. And we see just how cosmic Ezekiel's vision really is. God's plan has always been to restore all humanity and all creation back to his life-giving presence. And so the book ends with the name of this garden city, the Lord is there. And so Ezekiel's visions come to a close, full of hope for a new future, new humans living in a new world that's animated by God's life-giving spirit. It's a world permeated with God's love and justice. And that's what the book of Ezekiel is all about.
God wanted from the start, right? I mean.
Whoa. And I had to work together to do it. It's forbidden. You can't do it alone.
So initial reactions to what we've just seen in Ezekiel. You can see the positivity, the nickname, the gospel of Ezekiel, you can sense where that's coming, right?
I think that's a picture that's done in Revelation. That's when Jesus returns again with the new temple and river.
It'll be even more spectacular than the
It'll
first
be,
one.
you
Yeah.
cannot even imagine.
That's what they say.
So it helps if, just a quick reference here, it helps when you're reading the book of Revelation to already know where some of this stuff is coming from Ezekiel. The seer is drawing up, is always, the Bible is always
Connecting up.
making these connections between the different books. And so the more you know about the books, you can see what they're doing.
No, I was just saying that you have this, if I remember, Isaiah kind of leans towards this bad news, then there's hope. And we went through this with Jeremiah, right? The bad news and the hope. And then here we went deep into despair. And these are some incredible images of the coming Christ and the defeat of evil. I just love that idea of, I know there's been lots of talk about Gog and these battles. I still not sure about, I think there's a lot of conversation about what's the timeline for that? Is that, Christ returns and then the judgment of the nations, and then is this the new heaven and earth?
But you can see he kind of punted there. He said, well, some say this. But I've rarely heard him talk this way. He'll say Christian and Jewish
readers
differ. and not among each other, but together they differ from
Yeah.
Jewish and other Christian leaders. I have to point to a conversation, Jim, that we had earlier in the week. Oddly, it was, so the storm is coming and we were going to get something to eat. Jim goes, is evil ever destroyed or put to death, like demonic?
No.
And I think you should share your question, because it was an interesting one. Demons are often cast out, they're not destroyed, oddly.
At the end, they will be.
Okay, so
You can't have light without darkness.
This just flowed, and this has been something that's been ruminating with me as we talk about it week after week. And all of a sudden, I just thought about, could anyone show me a place in the Bible where you hear a demon or a god being destroyed? And okay, you'll have to show me, yeah, but to the point, it was kind of like what I'm wrestling with is this constant persistence of we live in a world, the joke would be, we live in a world that goes, oh, we push evil into the cellar and it stays there. But the reality is we live within a world that Jesus refers to Satan as the prince and the power of this world, right? We talked about that. But then, like, I was thinking about like the story of Goliath, David and Goliath, as an example. Surely Goliath went to his gods and said, my God can beat your God. And then the story is David, of course, trusted in our God, right? So then you're really having these gods fight. And kind of the vision, the new thought I had is, even though Goliath was slain, whatever spirit that maybe embodied him, you don't hear scripture ever say, and that God was destroyed, or that God was put to death.
But what kind of?
More or less, when you hear Jesus, when he interacts with the demons, he's compassionate on them. That's my only point. He says, keep your mouth quiet, get out of here. But you don't literally read a part where it says an evil spirit was destroyed. It's more displaced. That's what we ultimately came with. The evil spirits, for at least in this dispensation, seem to be displaced.
except I can think of one example in the New
What about
Testament,
the
which is
hogs?
the hogs.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it says the hogs, not the demons.
No,
No,
the demons
went
went
into
into
the
the
hogs.
And the
hogs.
hogs drowned,
and
but
the
it didn't
hogs
say that,
drowned.
it didn't say that's bad news for the demons.
Well, you
Bad news
assume
for
that
the
it
hogs,
was.
yeah.
Bad news
Yeah.
for the-
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
explicitly say, it would make sense, the demons are making a deal.
Yeah.
Making a deal, don't cast me into the pit of fire. But can you send us over here to the pigs? Which I think is an open door, right? So the pigs run off the cliff, the demons get.
So I
get
think
away out.
this is a longer discussion, but I thought it's an interesting one. But you do have Gog and Magog here, where he is going to put the seven, remember the seven nations is the summary of evil, right?
Yeah.
But within the life of that community. So it's not just abstract demons like ghosts flying around. It's really the evil has taken over those communities, and now all evil in the world comes in this battle, Gog and Magog. And so there's something I think Ezekiel's trying to say about God finally cannot make a new creation in all the world unless he takes out evil.
That's good.
In this, but I pointed out because I think it's one of the only times I can think of where Ezekiel's vision is we're going to take out evil. We're going to take out evil. Because even in the book of Revelation, I think your theory holds up. Because the New Jerusalem comes down, there seems to still be disease. At one time it says all disease taken away, but then what's at the center? It's the tree where the leaves of the tree are for the healing of nations. You know, why do we need the healing of nations? Why do we need that? It hasn't disease all been taken away. So it's an interesting curveball again about maybe there's still something. We need the New Jerusalem still to minister some type of healing, even in the New World.
And we even said, as you think of the Lord's Prayer, Jesus could say, may all evil be destroyed and may all temptation be annihilated. But he doesn't. He says, save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. So it's really talking about us. It's saying, dear Lord, keep our church, our people from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. It's that itself, you say, wow, if Christ was saying that, he's again getting back to sort of, I guess for all of us and for me, it's a greater theology of the presence of evil. And often that is just kind of gently glossed over in the church. And I think our whole conversation with the Old Testament keeps us coming back to evil. So you have to have a growing theology. You don't need to be afraid of it, but a growing theology of what is evil, right?
Well, there's good and evil in all of us, and if it wasn't, we wouldn't need Jesus.
Right.
Evil lurks in the hearts of men.
Jim,
Only men, right?
Just in the.
Well, we know about the
Women are all good.
Jim, I'd like to comment on something there, because I think it's very, very important. I think the point should not be overlooked. Because this, what is evil, is so important for us to be able to define, especially not just by defining what evil is, but what are the countermeasures against evil? And I've never told anybody this. I spent 6 months of my life deeply embedded in studying evil.
Wow.
It was my Harvard professor that asked me to do this, to understand what good really is and the strategic countermeasures against it. When you get, and I don't want to get into a long discussion today, but I'd be happy to at another time, about what evil really looks like and how it manifests from a human behavior and a neuroscience standpoint. And then how do you counteract it? Because I spent a lot of my life figuring out the counteractions of how to counteract evil. It's something though, if we keep avoiding it, because we don't really want to deal with the ugliness of it. And yes, you're absolutely right. It's within all of us. And there's a reason for it. It's because there's you've heard the beauty and the beast, all of us have a beauty and a beast, but some people don't have the beauty part.
Yeah.
And that's called the dark triad. Those are the people who are highly narcissistic, highly Machiavellian manipulators, and very deep into sociopathic or psychopathic lack of conscience. And there are people, literally, you can measure this. And sometime, Jim, if you're ever interested, I'll show you the studies on it.
Yeah, there's probably others interested too, so thank you.
So that's a good description of Gog.
And Gog and Magog are mentioned in Revelation.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now, it's interesting too, and then we'll
40,
shortly get in
31.
our group. He's writing from Babylon.
Magog.
So obviously, what is the city that represents evil most often associated in the Bible?
Babylon.
Yeah, here you can't say that because you're living in Babylon. So I think he had to go to other biblical sources to keep his, to be okay there. Just 10 minutes, so we'll get in our groups. Same with those online. If you want to get into a small group, we'll put you there just for 10 minutes and then we'll close out. Okay. What are you seeing in this turn from judgment to the gospel of Ezekiel? What's our takeaway now?
Yeah, we're back. Guy over there, I don't know, I gotta go.
All right. We want to bring things back to the group just for a couple minutes before we.
Ready.
Before I ask for some general comments, just to say, I've been really pleased by, we don't call it the Sunday Forum during the summer, we're calling it Table Talks. And This last one really has taken off, which I find quite interesting, on the Sound of Freedom.
Oh, I haven't listened to that one yet.
That has become the second most popular Sunday forum of this whole summer, which I just think is interesting. I would not have predicted that. I have to admit, I just would not have predicted that. Jim?
I just wanna with Jenna, I wanna say, here's something that you could do, right? So if you go in to the link that we have, you can copy the link of the Sound of Freedom and send it to somebody.
Yep.
Right, so Pastor Rick has 4 really practical things that we can do, and one of the things is to spread the word. And I can help you if you're if you haven't copied a link before, but you basically just highlight that link and paste it into your email if you want to send an email, and it's similar to that with a text message. And you could just pass it along. One thing you could do, you can actually copy it into, let's say, your Facebook page, and just say, I was really touched by our pastor who shared this about the Sound of Freedom, and we could make this thing really take off.
So, the most popular one this summer, this will not surprise you, is Barbie. The Barbie was fun. Oppenheimer was, enjoy, but this is important. This one has, there's more at stake, so to speak. And so it's important. I think Howard was mentioning, we do have part of our local government that has dedicated resources to this issue, right? So it's even here in Naples, which is important because we're in Florida and this happens in Florida, as we mentioned.
Well, I had good news and bad news because, last Sunday, all the movies were $4. So I thought, oh, this is gonna be, a real problem. So right after church, I went to the theater and I sat at the side and thought I would do some reading, etc. Did not realize that at that same theater, within the same theater 20, was a church. And the church has met there for 2 years.
Yep.
And I met wonderful people. I saw the most darling kids. I mean, this is a really active, alive church. And when I was a tad late coming here, Matt said to me, well, you're number 77. They commune about 125 every Sunday at this church. And I mean, the most darling kids. So that was the good news. And then I saw them.
Robert was 78.
Like,
Robert was 78.
yeah. So it was a high and a low.
So anyway, I just want to point that out. This week is also an important one. And I actually want feedback on this one. And as you know, to try to summarize our mission statement is hard because there's only one person in the church who I know has memorized the mission statement, and that's Jim Cooper. He's the only one who can rattle it off for you.
One church, many communities, is that it?
No,
But
Lord.
here's the thing, that's
We're a
That's
Christ-centered
not-
community,
Yes.
where God's Spirit transforms our lives as we worship, love, serve, and share.
so, again, Jim's the only one who knows that. So the question was, Matt, how do you summarize that in a way that we can hold on to? And we've been saying one church, multiple communities. That has taken root. People use that phrase, but that's not really a mission statement.
No.
So what we were at a conference in Milwaukee, as you know, the week we were not here, and they talked about flow, which is our language of faith work economics. But even fui, it's hard to talk about fui. So they talk about flow for the life of the world. And then we added, because we're Lutheran, it has to be G flow, gospel for the life of, for the good of the world, for the life of the world, which is really Ezekiel, right? It's the good news of Ezekiel. So I'm going to try this week to tell the story of Emmanuel's mission through G flow. And I'm going to use the marketing campaign in the 1990s for milk. Do you remember that one?
Mhm.
Got milk?
Oh, sure, yeah.
So we're going to change it to got G flow. And so we show some clips, which I have to admit was kind of fun to go back and show these clips. And I'm not going to spoil that clip because it's just, I think it's precious, and then tie our mission into that. But part of the reason I want feedback is we do have to have a whimsical way of sharing what we're about at Emmanuel. And so when I go out to the park and we're doing the feeding, I think that's chief law. It's gospel for the life of the world, you know, and as well as when we preach on Sunday morning or any of the other ministries, multiple ministries that we do. So in any case, on that one next week, I'll ask you for some feedback. I really do want to know how do we talk about our mission in ways that people can hold on to and talk about?
Can we go back and get previous ones? Because, you know, I'm not technically adept and I'd like to go back and see the Barbie, etc.
We're going to have best of table talks sometime.
Like Luther. Okay.
Yeah, best of table talks in October, I think, and we'll just see which one have been the most popular. It won't be all of them, I think it's too many, but whichever ones were the most popular. But you know, Barbie right now is the most popular, and now Sound of Freedom is pretty significant.
Just as an aside, Edie, they're all up on our YouTube channel. So
Another foreign language to me.
Gina
should be able to show you where it's at, and how to get there.
Yeah, they're all listed out with everything. But, so it's also important to know that many people are watching these videos that are taped online. So I think it's really, it's been surprising to me. I thought there'd be some, but I didn't think there'd be this many who are following this regularly, you know. So we have many, many more people who watch this during the week than are here live. Double, triple.
Yes, so I just one thing, I don't know if on Sunday nights, I just found out Chosen, they're running the whole series again, so that everybody knows that. It's on CW at 8 o'clock at night. It's gonna be going up until Christmas Eve.
Oh, we're starting, and we'll be starting happy hour.
Yeah, Christmas specials.
Once I get to the wine store and stock up. It'll probably be September, October. I think that in October, when people start coming back to see if we can generate, remember, we did happy hour for a long time and we watch an episode of The Chosen and then discuss it together on Thursday nights. And so we're going to do that again this fall.
But right now, this is really good for everybody to know because it's gonna do Christmas Eve. It's gonna be on every.
And we're going to start with season 2 because it's been a long time since I've seen them, you know, so it'll be good to watch season 2 and then we'll go season 3. And now we're talking 15 to 20 weeks already. And I know they've started season 4.
It's right after the well. Season 1 ends with what's at the well.
After the Woman's Well. I would start at the beginning, but I think a lot of people have seen those and some of remember those, but season 2, I can't remember anymore. So, and we'll help people to find those episodes because you have to have the app. That's a little trickier to watch those.
Yeah, I watched the
No,
ones
I
that
think on the
did.
website, if you go down our main page, there's the summer table talks. When you click on that, which I've done right now, they have, at least she's trying to keep the last 4 weeks there.
We used to do the episodes of The Chosen until that became forbidden. So I think you have to have the app at least, but we'll check that out so that when we do this, we'll give instruction on how to find it, you know, because that's what makes it fun is to watch it. I think it's some of the best Bible study discussions we've had was in response to The Chosen. They were really, really good. And, you know, we'll have Dennis, Russell has already agreed to choose our wine for us each week.
Awesome.
So it's good. Let's end with a word of prayer. Oh, next week, Daniel.
Oh,
We're hopping out of the pan and into the fire.
We're getting there.
Remember Daniel, end of the exile, and he's gonna, you know, he's a favorite son of the Babylonians, and then they forget who he was, and then Cyrus tends to like him. So he's a fascinating figure as we're moving from Babylonian dominance to Persian dominance. Yeah. Good and gracious God, we thank you for the visions, for the words clear and direct, and also for the hope of you being our shepherd. We pray that you would indeed lead your sheep, us, to greener pastures, and that you would give us indeed, as our good shepherd, a life of abundance. Pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for going in the weeds today.
Yeah.
That'd be good, like Esther and Malachi, stuff all at the same time, isn't it?